Hello, everyone. We talked about the Battle of Pokrovsk, which is still going on. We talked about various political events taking place that are linked to the war in Ukraine, one way or the other. Let's go back to what is actually going on the ground. And I mention it often enough, what I hear from my parents, what I hear from my former classmates who are still in there. But I don't think people still have a concept of what it's like down there, because here's the thing, folks. What is happening on the ground, the drone attacks, the missile attacks, the gliding bombs, the infrastructure targets, all of that, it doesn't stop just because it's no longer being covered. Here's the thing. It has become so commonplace that the only time it gets a news story outside of Ukraine is when someone dies, when it's particularly horrid, when it's particularly deadly. Just like this story today. So there was another Russian hit on Ukrainian civilians, and 6 people died. The picture you see is that of an apartment building in Dnipro. I mentioned Dnipro and I showed you on the map. It's Zaporizhia's next door neighbor to the north, kind of its sister city. So an apartment building was struck and 2 people died there. In addition to the 2 that were killed, 12 were wounded, and 3 more died in Zaporizhia. I don't know if 2 of those happened to be my parents. I haven't heard back from them yet, so I don't know if my parents are alive as of this moment. Overall, there have been strikes on 25 locations across Ukraine. And in addition to striking apartment buildings, residential areas, the electrical and heating systems were targeted. So many people were left without electricity and heating. And November is cold in Ukraine. So even though it is adjacent to the Black Sea, it's not quite the same as living next to the ocean. Well, it's true that the sea softens the climate in the southern areas of Ukraine somewhat. It is still largely a landlocked country with the exception of the southern border. So the climate is mostly moderate continental, which means it gets hot summers and cold winters. And because of the specifics of the geography there, they get not just cold winters, but very windy, dry winters. So, and during that time, the Russians left people without electricity and heat. There were some major energy facilities that were damaged in Poltava, Kharkiv, and Kyiv region. The power cuts affected Dnipropetrovsk, Chernihiv, Zaporizhia, Odessa, and Kirovohrad regions. So again, remember, the regions in Ukraine are determined by the central major city. So like there is the city of Zaporizhia and there is a Zaporizhia region. So basically those are like an equivalent of counties in the United States. So imagine if your entire county was left without heat and electricity. That's what it's like. So a lot of the critical infrastructure facilities have already been reconnected. The water supply is being maintained using the backup generators. Of course, Russia continues to insist that the attacks on energy targets are aimed at Ukrainian military. That is a lie. Just like every time they hit civilian areas and murder Ukrainian civilians, and then they say they were only targeting military targets and their targets were achieved. It's just another lie. Every single year of this war, every single fall, they keep boasting that if they cannot defeat the Ukrainians outright, they're going to freeze them out. And the longer Ukrainians refuse to surrender as they defend their own country, their very right to exist as a people, the more Russians get pissed off and the more they become hell-bent on murdering more civilians. President Zelensky reiterated that there should be no exceptions when it comes to Western sanctions on Russia and Russia's allies. And look at this. Look at the timing of this. These strikes came hours after the US government, after President Trump, gave Hungary a 1-year exemption from restrictions on buying oil and gas from Russia. Remember, Trump said, this war would end if only Europe would stop buying Russian oil. To which Europe responded, we already have, except for 3 Russia's allies, Bosnia, Slovakia, and Hungary. And Hungary came up with this bullshit story that they're landlocked and that somehow prevents them from getting oil from somewhere else, even though it has landlocked neighbors that don't seem to have the same issue. So basically, to me, what it says is that in giving that exemption to Hungary, the US had just emboldened Russia to continue doing whatever the fuck it wants by association. And I agree with Zelensky, even though I don't always agree with him, that for every strike on energy infrastructure and for every strike against Ukrainian civilians, there should be a response, a real, tangible, immediate response to Russia. Because they only understand the language of force. They only understand when there's tangible consequence to them. I am scheduled to talk to my parents tomorrow morning. I'll let you know if they are alive. More to come.